In the frozen forests of Eastern Europe, enemy soldiers whispered about a phantom that stalked their ranks. They called her the White Death, a shadow that moved like mist through snow-covered trees, striking with deadly precision before vanishing without a trace. What they didn't know was that behind the legend stood a young woman whose steady hands and unwavering heart would change the course of history. This is the true story of how an ordinary farm girl became one of the most feared snipers of all time, earning her place among the greatest marksmen in military history. Her story is one of courage, sacrifice, and the incredible power of the human spirit when pushed to its absolute limits. Some say she was born to be a soldier. Others believe she was forged by tragedy. The truth is both simpler and more extraordinary than either legend suggests. Anna Volkov grew up in a small farming village where the sound of gunfire was as common as church bells. Her father, Dmitry, had served in the Great War and returned home with stories that made young Anna's eyes widen with wonder and fear. He taught her to shoot when she was barely 10 years old, using an old hunting rifle that had belonged to his grandfather. The first time Anna held that rifle, something magical happened. The weight felt perfect in her small hands, as if the weapon had been crafted specifically for her. When she looked through the iron sights, the world seemed to slow down around her. Her breathing became steady and controlled, her heartbeat calm and rhythmic. When she squeezed the trigger for the first time, the bullet struck exactly where she intended it to go. Dmitry watched his daughter with growing amazement as the months passed. Anna showed natural talent that he had never seen before, not even among the seasoned soldiers he had served with during the war. She could hit targets at distances that would challenge experienced marksmen, and she did it with the casual ease of someone picking apples from a tree. But Anna's childhood was not all target practice and hunting trips with her father. She helped her mother, Katerina, with the endless chores that kept their small farm running. She milked cows before dawn, gathered eggs from stubborn hens, and spent long summer days working in the vegetable garden that fed their family through the harsh winters. These simple tasks taught her patience, discipline, and the quiet strength that would serve her well in the years to come. The village where Anna lived had seen its share of conflict over the centuries. Old-timers told stories of armies that had marched through their fields, of battles fought in the very hills where Anna now practiced her marksmanship. The land itself seemed to remember these conflicts, and perhaps that memory had somehow found its way into Anna's bones. As Anna grew older, her reputation as a marksman spread throughout the region. Local hunting competitions became showcases for her incredible skill, and veteran hunters who had been shooting for decades found themselves humbled by this quiet farm girl who never seemed to miss her target. She won every competition she entered, often by margins that left spectators shaking their heads in disbelief. Despite her growing fame, Anna remained humble and hardworking. She understood that her gift came with responsibility, and she never used her skills carelessly or for show. When she hunted, it was to feed her family. When she competed, it was to honor the traditions her father had taught her. And, when she practiced alone in the woods, it was with the dedication of someone who knew that excellence required constant effort. The political situation in their country was growing more unstable with each passing year. Anna's father followed the news closely, reading newspapers and listening to radio broadcasts with the worried expression of a man who had seen war before and recognized its approach. He began to speak more seriously with Anna about her shooting, treating their practice sessions less like father-daughter bonding time and more like military training. Anna noticed the change in her father's attitude, but she didn't fully understand what it meant until the day everything changed. She was 17 years old, practicing her shooting in a clearing deep in the forest, when she heard the distant rumble of engines. At first, she thought it might be tractors from a neighboring farm, but the sound was wrong, too mechanical, too threatening. She climbed to the top of a tall pine tree, using skills she had learned as a child playing in these same woods, and peered through the branches toward the source of the noise. What she saw made her blood run cold. A long column of military vehicles was moving along the main road that led to her village, and the uniforms worn by the soldiers were not from her country's army. Anna scrambled down from the tree and ran home as fast as her legs could carry her. She burst through the front door of her family's small house, breathless and frightened, to find her parents huddled around their radio with several neighbors. The news was worse than she had feared. Enemy forces had crossed the border and were advancing rapidly through the countryside. Her father looked at her with eyes that seemed to have aged years in a single day. He spoke quietly, his voice heavy with the weight of terrible knowledge. The enemy was known for their brutal treatment of civilians, especially in rural areas like theirs. Villages that resisted were burned to the ground, and their inhabitants faced unspeakable horrors. The family had a choice to make, and they had to make it quickly. They could try to flee, joining the streams of refugees already clogging the roads and hoping to reach safety before the advancing army caught up with them. Or they could stay and fight, using their knowledge of the local terrain and Anna's exceptional marksmanship skills to resist the occupation. That night, as enemy forces drew closer to their village, Anna lay awake in her bed listening to the sound of distant explosions and the worried whispers of her parents in the next room. She thought about the rifle her father had given her, now cleaned and loaded and waiting by her bedroom door. She thought about the countless hours she had spent practicing, the thousands of rounds she had fired, the steady improvement in her accuracy and technique. Most of all, she thought about her family and neighbors, simple farming people who deserved to live in peace but who now faced an enemy that understood only violence and fear. As dawn approached and the sound of gunfire grew closer, Anna made a decision that would transform her from a farm girl into a legend. She would not run. She would not hide. She would fight, using every skill her father had taught her and every ounce of courage she could muster. The enemy soldiers advancing on her village had no idea what was waiting for them in the form of a 17-year-old girl with steady hands and an unbreakable spirit. The war was coming to Anna's doorstep, but she was ready to meet it head-on. Her transformation from marksman to warrior was about to begin, and nothing would ever be the same again. The enemy arrived at dawn, just as Anna had feared they would. She watched from her concealed position in the church bell tower as the first military vehicles rolled into the village square. The soldiers who climbed out of the trucks moved with the casual arrogance of conquerors, their weapons held ready, but their attention focused more on what they could steal than on potential threats. Anna had positioned herself in the bell tower before sunrise, carrying her father's hunting rifle and a small bag of ammunition. The ancient church sat on a small hill overlooking the village center, giving her an excellent view of the entire area. More importantly, the thick stone walls and narrow windows would provide perfect cover while allowing her to engage targets from multiple angles. She had never killed a human being before, and, despite all her preparation, Anna found her hands trembling slightly as she watched the soldiers below. These were not the paper targets she had practiced on, not the deer and rabbits she had hunted for food. These were men with families and dreams of their own, even if they served an army that brought only death and destruction. But Anna's moment of doubt evaporated when she saw what the soldiers were doing to her neighbors. Old Henrik, who ran the village bakery, was dragged from his shop and beaten for refusing to hand over his life savings. Maria Petrov, a young mother with 2 small children, was roughly shoved aside when she tried to protect her home from being searched and ransacked. The final straw came when Anna saw Lieutenant Klaus Weber, the officer commanding the unit, strike her own mother across the face with his leather gloves. Katerina Volkov had been trying to explain that their family had no valuable possessions worth taking, but Weber seemed to enjoy terrorizing the helpless civilians. Anna's breathing steadied as her finger found the trigger of her rifle. The trembling in her hands disappeared, replaced by the rock-steady control she had developed through years of practice. Through her rifle scope, Lieutenant Weber's head filled her field of view, his cruel smile clearly visible as he continued to threaten Anna's mother. The shot was perfect. Weber dropped instantly, the sound of the rifle echoing off the stone buildings surrounding the village square. For a moment, the other soldiers stood frozen in confusion, unable to determine where the shot had come from. That moment of hesitation was all Anna needed to chamber another round and acquire her next target. Her second shot dropped the sergeant who had been beating old Henrik. Her third eliminated the soldier who had been threatening Maria Petrov and her children. Each bullet found its mark with mechanical precision, and each enemy soldier who fell increased the panic and confusion among their surviving comrades. The remaining soldiers finally located Anna's position in the bell tower, but by then, it was too late for them to mount an effective response. Anna had prepared multiple shooting positions throughout the church, and she moved between them with the fluid grace of someone completely comfortable in her environment. When the soldiers tried to storm the church, they found themselves facing a phantom who seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. Anna picked off the enemy soldiers one by one as they attempted to enter the church through various doors and windows. She had studied every inch of the building during her childhood, playing hide and seek with her friends in its shadowy corners and hidden passages. Now that intimate knowledge served her well as she turned the house of worship into a fortress. The battle lasted less than 20 minutes, but it felt like hours to Anna as she fought with deadly efficiency. When the shooting finally stopped, every enemy soldier in the village square lay dead or dying. Anna remained in the bell tower for another hour, watching for reinforcements that never came. Only when she was certain the immediate threat had passed did she finally climb down from her perch. The villagers who emerged from their hiding places looked at Anna with a mixture of awe and fear. The quiet farm girl they had known all her life had just demonstrated combat skills that would have impressed seasoned military veterans. Some of the older residents crossed themselves as they passed her, as if they couldn't quite believe what they had witnessed. Anna's parents rushed to embrace their daughter, relief and pride warring with concern in their eyes. Dmitri examined Anna's rifle and shook his head in amazement when he realized she had used less than half her ammunition to eliminate an entire enemy squad. Katerina simply held Anna close, understanding that her little girl had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. But there was no time for extended celebrations or grief. Anna knew that more enemy forces would arrive soon, drawn by the reports of the soldiers who had failed to check in with their commanders. The village had won its first battle, but the war was far from over. Anna spent the next few days preparing for the inevitable counterattack. She studied maps of the surrounding countryside, identifying potential shooting positions and escape routes. She practiced moving silently through the forest, learning to use natural cover and camouflage techniques that would make her nearly invisible to pursuing enemies. Most importantly, Anna began to develop the tactical thinking that would eventually make her legendary. She understood that her greatest advantage lay not just in her marksmanship, but in her ability to strike without warning and disappear before the enemy could respond. She was fighting a guerrilla war now, and she needed to think like a guerrilla. The enemy reinforcements arrived 3 days later, bringing with them a full company of seasoned soldiers led by a colonel who had earned his reputation fighting partisans in other occupied territories. Colonel Hans Richter was known for his ruthless efficiency and his ability to root out resistance movements that had frustrated other commanders. Richter had studied the reports of what happened to Lieutenant Weber's unit, and he correctly guessed that he was dealing with an exceptionally skilled sniper operating from concealed positions. He deployed his soldiers in careful formations designed to minimize their exposure to long-range fire, and he ordered systematic searches of every building that could potentially house a marksman. But Anna was no longer hiding in buildings. She had moved her base of operations to the dense forest that surrounded the village, creating a network of concealed positions that allowed her to observe enemy movements while remaining completely hidden. From these forest hideouts, she could engage targets at extreme range and then melt away into the wilderness before pursuit forces could even reach her firing position. Her first shot against Richter's forces came from nearly 800 meters away, an almost impossible distance for the hunting rifle she was using. The bullet struck down Richter's communications sergeant just as he was setting up radio equipment in the village square. By the time the colonel's soldiers reached the spot where Anna had fired from, they found nothing but a few spent shell casings and some disturbed undergrowth. Over the following weeks, Anna waged a relentless campaign of psychological warfare against the occupying forces. She never attacked in the same place twice, never used the same approach route, never followed a pattern that enemy analysts could predict. Sometimes she would strike multiple times in a single day, eliminating isolated sentries or small patrols. Other times she would remain silent for days at a time, allowing the enemy's paranoia and fear to build to unbearable levels. The soldiers under Richter's command began to show signs of severe stress. They jumped at shadows, fired at imaginary threats, and demanded constant radio contact with their headquarters. Supply convoys required heavy escorts, and even routine patrols became dangerous missions that might end in sudden death from an unseen sniper. Anna's reputation spread beyond her small village as word of her exploits reached other resistance groups operating in the region. She began receiving messages from partisan commanders asking for her assistance with specific operations, and she started coordinating her activities with the broader resistance movement. But Anna never forgot that her primary mission was protecting her family and neighbors. No matter how far her operations took her from home, she always returned to check on the village and ensure that enemy forces had not established a permanent presence there. Her growing legend was built on a foundation of love and loyalty that would sustain her through the darkest days ahead. Colonel Richter had called for reinforcements 3 times in the past month, each request becoming more desperate as his casualties mounted and his soldiers grew increasingly demoralized. The sniper he was hunting had become more than just a tactical problem, she was destroying the fighting effectiveness of his entire regiment through fear alone. Anna had evolved far beyond the farm girl who had first picked up a rifle in the church bell tower. Months of constant warfare had transformed her into something harder and more dangerous. She moved through the forest like a native creature, reading signs in broken twigs and disturbed earth that would have been invisible to trained soldiers. Her clothing was now a carefully assembled collection of forest camouflage, pieced together from captured enemy gear and natural materials that helped her blend seamlessly with her environment. The rifle her father had given her was showing signs of wear from constant use, but Anna had supplemented it with weapons taken from fallen enemies. She now carried a captured military sniper rifle with a high-quality scope, along with a silenced pistol for close-range encounters. More importantly, she had learned to use improvised explosives and booby traps, turning her forest sanctuary into a deadly maze for any enemies foolish enough to pursue her. Her methods had become increasingly sophisticated as well. Anna no longer simply shot enemy soldiers and disappeared, she orchestrated elaborate psychological operations designed to maximize fear and confusion. She would leave evidence of her presence in places where soldiers thought they were safe, creating an atmosphere of constant dread that wore down enemy morale more effectively than direct attacks. One of her most effective techniques involved taking personal items from soldiers she had killed and leaving them in locations where their surviving comrades would find them. A sergeant's wristwatch might appear on a mess hall table. A lieutenant's family photograph could be discovered tucked into someone's equipment bag. These discoveries created the impression that the ghost sniper could strike anywhere, at any time, without leaving any trace of how she had accessed supposedly secure areas. Anna's network of local supporters had grown as well. Farmers and villagers throughout the region provided her with intelligence about enemy movements, safe houses when she needed rest, and supplies to sustain her operations. Children served as messengers, carrying coded information between resistance cells. Even elderly grandmothers contributed by preparing food and maintaining the hidden supply caches that kept Anna's campaign running. The enemy had begun calling her Der Geist, the ghost. Radio intercepts revealed the deep fear that Anna's activities had created throughout the occupying forces. Soldiers refused to volunteer for patrol duty, and even officers were reluctant to venture outside their fortified positions without heavy escorts. Some units had requested transfers to other theaters of operation, preferring to face conventional armies rather than deal with an invisible enemy who could kill them without warning. Anna's greatest triumph during this period came when she successfully eliminated General Erich von Stein, the regional commander responsible for implementing brutal policies throughout the occupied territory. Von Stein had arrived in the area with a large security detail, traveling in an armored convoy that should have been virtually impregnable. But Anna had spent weeks studying the general's travel patterns and security procedures. She knew that von Stein had a weakness for visiting frontline positions to maintain morale among his troops, and she correctly predicted that he would eventually visit Colonel Richter's embattled regiment. When von Stein's convoy arrived, Anna was waiting in a carefully prepared position more than a kilometer away from the main road. She had hollowed out a shooting height in a hillside that provided an excellent view of the route the general's vehicles would take, and she had spent days ranging the distances and calculating the precise adjustments needed for such an extreme shot. The convoy included 4 armored vehicles and 24 guards, but Anna waited patiently for the perfect moment. When von Stein's car stopped at a checkpoint and the general stepped out to confer with local commanders, Anna had a clear shot for exactly 17 seconds. She made it count. The bullet struck General von Stein in the head just as he was pointing toward the hills where Anna lay hidden. The shot was so precise and came from such an extreme distance that the general's bodyguards initially thought he had suffered a medical emergency. Only when they found the entry wound did they realize what had happened, and, by then, Anna had already disappeared into the wilderness. Von Stein's assassination sent shockwaves throughout the enemy command structure. Security procedures were immediately revised, travel restrictions were implemented for all high-ranking officers, and a massive manhunt was launched to find the ghost sniper who had managed to kill one of their most important leaders. Anna used the chaos that followed von Stein's death to launch her most ambitious operation yet, a coordinated attack on the main enemy supply depot that fed the entire regional occupation force. Working with 3 other resistance cells, she planned a complex assault that would cripple enemy logistics for months. The supply depot was heavily fortified and guarded by more than 100 soldiers, but Anna had identified its crucial weakness. The facility's electrical power came from a single transformer station located nearly 2 kilometers away in a seemingly unimportant maintenance building. If that transformer could be destroyed, the entire depot would be plunged into darkness, disabling its defensive systems and creating the perfect conditions for a night assault. Anna positioned herself on a ridge overlooking the transformer station while her allies prepared to attack the main depot once the power went out. She carried 3 types of ammunition for this mission: armor-piercing rounds to penetrate the transformer's protective housing, incendiary bullets to start fires, and explosive rounds to ensure maximum damage. At precisely midnight, Anna began her assault on the transformer station. Her first shot penetrated the main transformer housing and caused a shower of sparks that lit up the night sky. Her second shot ignited the oil cooling system, creating a massive fireball that could be seen from kilometers away. Her third shot hit the backup generator, ensuring that power could not be quickly restored. The supply depot was plunged into complete darkness just as Anna's allies launched their coordinated assault from 3 different directions. The enemy guards, suddenly, blind and confused, found themselves under attack by invisible enemies who seemed to know the facility's layout better than they did. Within an hour, the depot was completely destroyed, and tons of supplies desperately needed by the occupying forces had gone up in flames. Anna's role in the supply depot raid elevated her status from local resistance fighter to strategic military asset. High-ranking partisan commanders began requesting her personal involvement in critical operations, and enemy intelligence services started dedicating significant resources to hunting her down. But perhaps the most significant development was the emergence of copycat snipers inspired by Anna's example. Young women throughout the occupied territories began picking up rifles and attempting to emulate her tactics. While few possessed her natural skill or extensive training, their efforts multiplied the psychological impact of Anna's campaign and forced enemy commanders to spread their resources ever thinner. The enemy response became increasingly desperate and brutal. Collective punishment policies were implemented, threatening to execute civilians for any resistance activity in their areas. Rewards were offered for information leading to Anna's capture, with bounties large enough to tempt even loyal supporters. Special counter-sniper teams were brought in from other theaters, equipped with the latest technology and trained specifically to hunt skilled marksmen. Despite these escalating threats, Anna continued her operations with methodical efficiency. She had learned to compartmentalize her emotions, focusing entirely on her mission while suppressing the trauma and exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm her. Sleep came in brief intervals between operations, meals were eaten cold and alone in hidden forest shelters, and human contact was limited to brief encounters with resistance contacts who provided intelligence and supplies. Anna knew that her campaign could not continue indefinitely. The enemy was adapting to her tactics, and the intensity of their search efforts was making it increasingly difficult to operate safely. But she also understood that every day she remained active was another day that the occupying forces remained demoralized and off balance. More importantly, Anna had begun to sense that larger forces were stirring in the war. Radio broadcasts from the outside world suggested that the tide of conflict was beginning to turn, and that the enemy's resources were being stretched thin across multiple fronts. If she could maintain her operations long enough, she might yet see her homeland liberated by conventional forces. The ghost had become legendary, but the woman behind the legend was paying a price that few could understand or endure. Anna Volkov was transforming from a skilled sniper into something approaching a force of nature, but that transformation was costing her pieces of her humanity that she might never be able to recover. Major Wilhelm Herzog arrived in the region with a reputation that made even veteran soldiers nervous. Known throughout the enemy forces as the Hunter, Herzog specialized in tracking down and eliminating resistance fighters who had proven too elusive for conventional military operations. His methods were unconventional, often brutal, but they had proven devastatingly effective in other occupied territories. Herzog brought with him a hand-picked team of specialists, counter-sniper experts, tracking specialists, psychological warfare officers, and intelligence analysts who had studied Anna's operations in microscopic detail. They established their headquarters in the regional capital, transforming an entire building into a sophisticated command center dedicated to a single mission: finding and killing the ghost sniper. Anna first learned of Herzog's arrival through her network of civilian informants. A young boy who sold newspapers near the enemy headquarters overheard officers discussing the new commander's plans, and, within hours, that information had been passed through a chain of resistance contacts to reach Anna in her forest hideout. The intelligence was troubling. Herzog wasn't planning to simply increase patrols or improve security measures. He was implementing a systematic approach that would gradually eliminate Anna's advantages. He began by establishing a detailed timeline of every confirmed sniper attack, mapping out patterns in Anna's behavior that previous commanders had missed. Herzog's first innovation was the creation of hunter-killer teams, small units of elite soldiers equipped with advanced radio equipment who could respond rapidly to sniper attacks. Instead of trying to prevent Anna's strikes, Herzog planned to use them as opportunities to track her back to her hiding places. Each team carried direction-finding equipment that could pinpoint the source of rifle shots, and they were trained to move silently through forest terrain. Anna discovered the effectiveness of these new tactics during what should have been a routine operation. She had positioned herself to eliminate a supply convoy traveling along a remote forest road, choosing a shooting position that had served her well in previous attacks. Her first shot disabled the lead vehicle's engine, bringing the convoy to a halt in a location where the vehicles would be vulnerable to follow-up strikes. But, as Anna prepared her second shot, she heard something that made her blood run cold: the distant sound of radio communications in the enemy's language, coming from multiple directions in the forest around her position. Herzog's hunter-killer teams had triangulated her location within minutes of her first shot, and they were already moving to surround her. Anna abandoned her planned attack and immediately began executing an escape plan she had prepared for exactly this situation. She moved deeper into the forest using a route that would take her through the densest undergrowth and most difficult terrain, hoping that the challenging conditions would slow down her pursuers more than they slowed her down. For 3 days and nights, Anna played a deadly game of cat and mouse with Herzog's teams. She used every trick she had learned during months of forest warfare: false trails, improvised booby traps, and carefully planned deceptions designed to confuse and delay her hunters. But Herzog's men were professionals who had trained specifically for this type of pursuit, and they proved remarkably difficult to shake. Anna's closest call came on the second night of the pursuit, when she took shelter in an abandoned hunting cabin deep in the forest. She had used the cabin before as a rest stop during longer operations, and she thought it would provide a few hours of safety while she planned her next moves. But Herzog's tracking specialists had found evidence of her previous visits, and they were waiting when she arrived. The ambush was perfectly planned and expertly executed. As Anna approached the cabin, enemy soldiers opened fire from concealed positions, filling the air with bullets that splintered trees and kicked up dirt all around her. Anna threw herself behind a fallen log and returned fire with her pistol, but she was badly outnumbered and surrounded. Her escape came through a combination of careful preparation and desperate improvisation. Months earlier, Anna had prepared emergency supply caches throughout the forest, including one near the hunting cabin that contained smoke grenades taken from captured enemy equipment. She managed to reach the cache and deploy the grenades, creating a thick cloud of concealing smoke that allowed her to slip away while her enemies were temporarily blinded. But the encounter had cost Anna more than just ammunition and equipment. One of the enemy bullets had grazed her left shoulder, leaving her with a painful wound that would limit her mobility for weeks to come. More seriously, she had been forced to abandon most of her personal equipment, including detailed maps that showed the locations of other resistance safe houses and supply caches. Anna made her way to an emergency meeting point where she could contact other resistance cells and request medical assistance. The wound in her shoulder was not life-threatening, but it was becoming infected, and she knew that she needed proper medical attention soon. More importantly, she needed to warn other resistance fighters that Herzog's forces had captured intelligence that could compromise their operations. Dr. Stefan Novak, a village physician who had been secretly supporting the resistance since the beginning of the occupation, treated Anna's wound in the basement of his clinic. While he cleaned and bandaged the injury, he delivered news that was both encouraging and terrifying. The encouraging news was that Allied forces were advancing rapidly on multiple fronts, and there were reliable reports that the enemy's strategic situation was becoming desperate. The war might be over within months if current trends continued. The terrifying news was that Herzog had captured 2 resistance fighters during a raid the previous week, and under interrogation they had revealed details about Anna's support network. Several safe houses had been compromised, and at least a dozen civilian supporters had been arrested. Anna realized that Herzog was implementing a strategy of systematic pressure designed to gradually strip away all of her advantages. He wasn't trying to catch her directly, instead, he was eliminating her sources of intelligence, her supply lines, and her safe havens one by one. Eventually, she would be left isolated and alone, forced to operate without the civilian support that had made her campaign possible. The situation became even more critical when Anna learned that Herzog had captured Maria Petrov, the young mother whom Anna had saved during her first engagement with enemy forces. Maria knew the location of several resistance meeting points, and if she revealed that information under torture, the entire regional resistance network could be destroyed. Anna faced an agonizing choice. Her rational mind told her that attempting to rescue Maria would be suicidal. Herzog would certainly be expecting such an attempt, and he would have prepared the perfect trap. But Anna couldn't abandon the woman who had become a symbol of everything she was fighting to protect. The rescue operation would require Anna to venture into the heart of enemy-controlled territory and assault a heavily fortified detention facility where Maria was being held. It was exactly the kind of operation that Herzog hoped Anna would attempt, a desperate gamble that would force her to abandon all the tactical advantages that had kept her alive for so many months. Anna spent a week planning the rescue, studying guard schedules and identifying weaknesses in the facility's security. She knew that she would get only one chance, and that failure would almost certainly mean death or capture. But she also knew that some things were more important than her own survival. On the night of the rescue attempt, Anna approached the detention facility with equipment she had captured during previous operations: explosives, smoke grenades, and a silenced submachine gun that would give her better firepower in close-quarters combat. She had also recruited 2 other resistance fighters to provide diversionary attacks that would draw attention away from her actual assault route. The operation began when Anna's allies launched mortar attacks against the facility's main gate, creating noise and confusion that masked her approach from the opposite direction. While enemy guards rushed to respond to the diversion, Anna used explosives to blow a hole in the facility's rear wall and slip inside. Finding Maria proved easier than Anna had expected. Herzog's interrogators were creatures of habit who always used the same rooms for their brutal work. Anna located the right building and eliminated 2 guards with her silenced weapons before reaching the basement cells where political prisoners were held. Maria was barely conscious when Anna found her, showing signs of severe physical abuse that made Anna's hands shake with rage. But there was no time for anger or medical care. Enemy reinforcements were already responding to the diversionary attacks, and Anna had only minutes to complete the rescue before the facility was completely locked down. Getting Maria out of the building required all of Anna's combat skills and tactical knowledge. The injured woman could barely walk, forcing Anna to carry her through corridors filled with enemy soldiers who were searching for the source of the explosions. Anna's silenced weapons allowed her to eliminate several guards without raising an alarm, but she knew that her luck couldn't hold much longer. The escape from the facility became a running battle as enemy forces finally realized what was happening and began coordinating their response. Anna fought her way through multiple checkpoints, using smoke grenades and explosive charges to create confusion while carrying Maria toward the breach she had made in the outer wall. They reached the forest just as search helicopters arrived overhead, their powerful spotlights turning night into day as they swept the area looking for escaped prisoners. Anna and Maria crawled through thick undergrowth for more than an hour, moving slowly to avoid detection while enemy forces established a perimeter around the detention facility. When they finally reached safety at a resistance safe house 15 kilometers away, Anna discovered that Maria's rescue had come at a terrible cost. Herzog's forces had used the rescue attempt as an excuse to implement massive reprisals against the civilian population, arresting dozens of suspected resistance supporters and burning several villages that were thought to harbor partisan sympathizers. Anna realized that Herzog had achieved exactly what he intended. He had forced her to choose between the tactical discipline that had kept her alive and the human compassion that gave her campaign meaning. By saving Maria, Anna had proven that she could be manipulated into making strategic mistakes that served her enemy's purposes. The hunt was intensifying, and Anna was beginning to understand that she was fighting more than just a military campaign. She was engaged in a psychological battle with an opponent who understood her weaknesses as well as her strengths, and who was prepared to exploit both with ruthless efficiency. Spring was coming to the forests where Anna had spent the longest year of her life, but the changing seasons brought little comfort to the exhausted sniper who had become a legend. The wound in her shoulder had healed, but newer injuries accumulated faster than her body could recover from them. Dark circles surrounded her eyes, and her hands sometimes trembled from exhaustion that sleep could no longer cure. Herzog's campaign against her had evolved beyond simple pursuit into something approaching a siege. He had systematically eliminated most of Anna's support network, forcing her to rely on her own resources for food, ammunition, and intelligence. Worse still, he had begun implementing collective punishment policies so severe that many civilians were afraid to help the resistance, fearing that association with Anna would bring terrible retribution upon their families. The psychological pressure was becoming almost unbearable. Anna found herself questioning every decision, wondering whether her continued operations were helping or harming the people she had sworn to protect. Each successful attack brought swift retaliation against innocent civilians, and she began to feel as though she was fighting with her hands tied behind her back. But the war itself was changing, and Anna could sense that something significant was happening beyond her immediate area of operations. Radio broadcasts from the outside world spoke of massive offensives and collapsing enemy positions on multiple fronts. The sound of artillery could sometimes be heard in the distance, growing steadily closer as Allied forces advanced toward her homeland. Anna's opportunity for one final, decisive operation came when Herzog made a fatal mistake born of overconfidence. Convinced that he had Anna trapped and demoralized, he decided to establish a forward command post in the village where Anna had grown up. His plan was to use her childhood home as bait, forcing Anna to attack him on ground of his choosing where his advantages in numbers and equipment would prove decisive. Herzog moved into Anna's family home with a full security detail, converting the small farmhouse into a fortified command center bristling with guards and defensive positions. He correctly calculated that Anna would be unable to resist the emotional provocation of seeing enemy soldiers occupying the place where she had learned to shoot, where her parents had raised her, where her journey from farm girl to legendary sniper had begun. What Herzog failed to understand was that Anna knew every inch of the surrounding terrain with an intimacy that no amount of military training could match. She had played in these fields as a child, hunted in these woods as a teenager, and prepared defensive positions throughout the area during the early days of the occupation. The farmhouse that Herzog saw as the perfect trap was actually the center of Anna's most carefully prepared battleground. Anna spent 3 days observing Herzog's security arrangements, noting the positions of sentries, the timing of patrol schedules, and the locations of heavy weapons emplacements. She was amazed by the thoroughness of Herzog's preparations. He had clearly studied her tactics carefully and taken every reasonable precaution against a sniper attack. But Anna's plan didn't involve a conventional sniper engagement. Instead, she intended to turn Herzog's trap against him using the one advantage he couldn't neutralize: her complete mastery of the local environment. She had spent months preparing for this possibility, creating a network of hidden tunnels, concealed weapons caches, and carefully positioned explosive charges that could turn the entire area into a killing field. The attack began before dawn on a foggy morning that limited visibility to less than 50 meters. Anna triggered the first explosions while she was still nearly a kilometer away from the farmhouse, using remote detonators to destroy the road bridges that connected her family's property to the outside world. Herzog's forces suddenly found themselves cut off from reinforcement, trapped in an isolated position with limited escape routes. Anna's next targets were the communication facilities that Herzog's technicians had established in the barn behind her family's house. A series of precisely timed explosions destroyed radio equipment, telephone lines, and signal repeaters, leaving the enemy command post unable to call for help or coordinate with other units in the region. With Herzog's forces isolated and blind, Anna began the systematic elimination of his outer security perimeter. She moved through terrain she had known since childhood, using hidden passages and concealed fighting positions that allowed her to strike without warning and disappear before counterattacks could be organized. Each engagement followed the same pattern. Anna would appear suddenly, at extreme close range, eliminate multiple targets with rapid, precise shooting, and then vanish into underground tunnels or camouflaged hideouts that were invisible to the enemy soldiers searching for her. Her intimate knowledge of the area allowed her to move between positions in ways that seemed impossible to her frustrated opponents. Herzog quickly realized that he had walked into a carefully prepared ambush, but, by then, it was too late to withdraw from the trap he had set for himself. The bridges were destroyed, his communications were severed, and his soldiers were being picked off one by an enemy who seemed to materialize and disappear at will. The battle raged throughout the day, with Anna gradually tightening her grip around the enemy command post like a deadly noose. Herzog's professional soldiers, trained for conventional warfare, found themselves completely outmatched by an opponent who had turned the familiar landscape into a weapon against them. By evening, only Herzog himself and a handful of his personal guards remained alive, barricaded inside Anna's childhood home while she circled them like a patient predator. Anna could have finished them at any time, but she wanted Herzog to understand completely the magnitude of his defeat before she delivered the final blow. When she finally appeared in the doorway of her family's kitchen, Anna was carrying the same hunting rifle her father had given her on her 10th birthday. Herzog, wounded and desperate, raised his pistol to fire, but Anna's shot struck him down before he could pull the trigger. Standing in the home where she had learned to shoot, surrounded by the bodies of enemy soldiers who had thought they could trap her, Anna felt a strange mixture of triumph and emptiness. She had achieved the perfect victory, the complete destruction of the force that had been hunting her for months, but the cost of that victory had been higher than she had ever imagined. Her family's home was destroyed, riddled with bullet holes and scarred by explosions. Her parents had fled the area weeks earlier when Herzog's reprisals against civilians became too severe, and Anna didn't know if she would ever see them again. The village where she had grown up was a ghost town, its population scattered to refugee camps or killed in the brutal fighting that had consumed the region. Anna emerged from her family's ruined home to find Allied forces arriving in the distance. The advancing army that had been fighting its way across her homeland for months had finally reached her area, and the occupation that had defined her life for the past year was coming to an end. The soldiers who found Anna in the wreckage of what had once been Herzog's command post could barely believe what they were seeing. A young woman, barely 18 years old, had single-handedly eliminated an entire enemy unit and conducted a resistance campaign that had tied down thousands of enemy troops who were desperately needed elsewhere. When Allied intelligence officers debriefed Anna about her operations, they were astounded by the scope and sophistication of what she had accomplished. Her confirmed kills numbered in the hundreds, and her psychological warfare campaigns had affected enemy morale throughout an entire military district. Professional military analysts struggled to understand how an untrained farm girl had developed tactical skills that would have impressed veteran Special Forces operators. Anna's story spread rapidly through the Allied forces and eventually reached the international press, where she became a symbol of resistance against tyranny and oppression. The young woman who had started the war defending her village had become a legend whose exploits inspired resistance fighters throughout occupied Europe. But Anna herself struggled to adjust to life after war. The skills that had kept her alive in the forest, hypervigilance, mistrust of strangers, the constant expectation of violence, made it difficult for her to function in a peaceful society. She suffered from nightmares that replayed the countless battles she had fought, and she found it almost impossible to relate to people who had not shared her experiences. Anna eventually reunited with her parents, who had survived the war in a displaced persons camp hundreds of kilometers from their original home. The reunion was joyful but complicated. Anna's parents could see that their daughter had been fundamentally changed by her experiences, and they struggled to reconnect with someone who had become a stranger to them. In the years that followed, Anna rarely spoke publicly about her wartime experiences. She understood that many people saw her as a hero, but she found it difficult to accept praise for actions that had been born of necessity rather than choice. She had done what needed to be done to protect her family and community, nothing more and nothing less. Anna eventually married a fellow veteran and settled in a quiet rural area where she could find some measure of peace. She never fully escaped the shadows of her wartime experiences, but she learned to live with them. Her husband understood her need for solitude and respected the boundaries she had erected around the memories that were too painful to share. The legend of the ghost sniper lived on long after Anna herself had faded from public view. Military historians studied her tactics, resistance movements around the world drew inspiration from her example, and countless books and films attempted to capture the essence of her remarkable story. But perhaps Anna's greatest legacy was not her tactical innovations or her impressive kill count, it was her demonstration that ordinary people can find extraordinary courage when defending the things they hold most dear. A farm girl who had learned to shoot from her father had become one of history's most effective warriors, not through formal training or advanced equipment, but through determination, intelligence, and an unbreakable spirit. Anna Volkov proved that heroism comes in many forms, and that sometimes the most powerful weapon against tyranny is the simple refusal of good people to surrender their humanity in the face of overwhelming evil. Her story continues to inspire new generations who face their own struggles against injustice and oppression, reminding them that even the smallest light can drive away the deepest darkness.